banks.
Why?
Well, because again,
knowledge issue, or what is that about? Why they would not do it?
If you go back all the way to 100 years, 150 years, when the banks appeared in US, most of the banks were privately held. And this was done through partnerships. And then there was a process of equitization of the banks, and the founders of the banks attracted foreign outside investors. And then the next logical step was to list the shares of these banks in stock exchanges. And this has led to active development of the banking system in the United States. And as a result, you had the emergence of JP Morgans and Citis. And the same thing has happened in other countries. And so therefore, we go back to this point of you need fresh equity, fresh money coming to the banking system. And one of the best way to do it for the current owners of the banks in Mongolia to attract outside investors. And then list the shares of Mongolian banks at the Mongolian Stock Exchange as a first phase. And the next logical step would be for some of the bigger Mongolian banks to go to do IPO internationally. So if you go back to the recent history in Kazakhstan, one of the reasons that the Kazakhstan economy grew very fast, not only because of oil, which was obviously a big factor, but it was very much to do with the success that the Kazakh banks had in attracting capital from outside of Kazakhstan.
They have listed abroad.
Correct.
There are certain requirements probably for that, and our banks tried 2 banks here domestically.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the other banks will try internationally.
Yes.
If it is the case, that will be a good gate of capital to Mongolia.
Absolutely. If you look at what already, I think there's already a number of positive trends happening. Trade Development Bank successfully completed its Eurobond when they raised
100 million?
150 million.
150 million.
So this is already, I think, a big, will have impact on the banking system here, because not only it allows bank to lend more, but it also allows bank to reduce interest rates. You ask why the money is expensive.
Expensive.
Because the capital...
Shortage of total capital.
Correct. So if you have more capital to come to banking system, not only you have wider availability of capital and through loans, mortgages, but also the lower costs.
So the Mongolian commercial private banks are to go abroad to the major stock exchange to raise funds.
I think the first phase, I think, should be for some of these banks to start listing here locally, because we work on a daily basis with investors. And you may also know that our firm has developed an equity index for Mongolia, which includes not only companies that are listed at Mongolia Stock Exchange, but also Mongolia-focused companies listed internationally in places like London, Toronto, New York,
These mining
Hong Kong.
companies?
Yes, it's mostly mining companies.
Yes.
So obviously, as anyone thinks about...
What is this equity index about? They measure, what do they measure?
So this index allows investors to have a benchmark, and benchmark means that when they want to invest into Mongolia, they want to know how these investments are performing. So if, for example, Dow Jones, you look in the morning, the announcer would say that Dow Jones was up 1%, as investors feel more comfortable, more confident about the U.S. economy. And so we have MSCI Top 20 Index, which reflects what the performance of the shares that are listed in Mongolia Stock Exchange, but there is no index that provides you a tool to assess performance of companies that are listed outside of Mongolia. So like Ivanhoe Mines, Mongolia Mining Corporation, and others.
So what would it show the investor's sense on the events happening in Mongolia and their reflection on the total market value?
The market share of any company that's listed outside of Mongolia and with the companies that they have assets in Mongolia is reflection of investor sentiments, their view of where this company is going, and obviously the fortune of that company linked to what's happening to Mongolia. So as a result, what my point is that when people invest in Mongolia-related companies, it's 99%, and this index demonstrates this. 99% of all the companies that are linked to Mongolia are mining and resource companies. So therefore, investors, and we have seen many of them coming here and looking actively at non-resource and non-mining types of investments. And banking would be one of the type of industry, which would be very attractive to investors. So coming back to the point, so why there is shortage of capital in banking system, I think I found it is quite puzzling, because at one side you see the demand from Mongolians for mortgages, and banks cannot meet that demand. At the same time, you have investors that want to invest in outside and beyond mining, and yet none of the banks are listed their shares.
They are not connected in a certain way.
So if someone, a big manager, fund manager from Hong Kong or from London comes to Mongolia and say, I would like to invest in shares of the bank, he cannot do it because none of the banks are listed. And so as a result, I think this is fundamental.
How about creating a new bank?
Well, it's possible, but obviously it's going to be up to central bank to decide to issue new licenses. But I think we already have.
Isn't not the reason why? I mean, maybe central bank is not issuing new licenses.
Well, I think the central bank, the reason why they're not issuing the licenses.
Either the Mongolian banks capitalize more, or they issue a new license.
Well, I think right now the thinking of central bank is that we have 14 banks, and most of the banks, other than 3 big or 4 banks, are quite small. So instead of issuing new licenses, why don't we let these banks either to merge or attract more capital and grow?
We are waiting for the last 15 years.
I know.
Maybe the psychology of Mongolian owners of banks, we have very little experience with merging.
I think it's challenging, but I think the 2011 could be crucial for banking system.
Either you do or you behind.
Yes.
What do you think about this Mongolian Development Bank?
I think
state-owned.
I think for Mongolia, with its enormous requirements for infrastructure investments and industrialization program that the government has envisioned, there is a big role for such institution.
Okay, so you think it is one of the things we should do?
Absolutely.
Because commercial banks, first, cannot do this size. Second, too expensive. Third, is your reason there is a closed channel for outside investors, right?
And if you go back to every single major emerging country, such as Korea, for example, even Japan back in 50s and 60s, one of the key things that they have done, they set up the government-owned development banks.
On the other hand, would not it will make the government even larger?
Well, I think when it comes to big investments in infrastructure, other than having the PPP models, which are the public-private partnerships, which I think should be encouraged, but there will be still so many areas where government has to step in and provide funding, because private sector will have many other things to deal with. And again, there will be lack of capital, there will be other issues. So as a result, again, like if you look at Korea and Japan, which I think is also important experience that you can draw from lessons, these 2 countries, as they were going through industrialization drive, they had government that was at the driving seat. And obviously private sector was involved very actively too. But these development banks were key to channel much needed capital into infrastructure projects.
Does it mean that all major public investment to infrastructure, etc., go through the bank?
It may be other forms, but I think there is much needed role for such a bank to play a meaningful role in government-led infrastructure projects.
Okay, let's touch a little bit, not very particular necessarily banking sector. We Mongolians are proud of saying we have big country, large territory, a lot cattle, animals, but yet we, for example, import almost half of our milk consumption from abroad.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the solution? How come in that way?
It's again goes back to the fact that you have limited capital domestically, and as a result you don't have well-developed processing industries. And but this is something that can be addressed and successfully tackled. And I mean, go back to again Russia. So anyone that lived in Russia early 90s, they know huge lines for bread, huge lines for milk, because the state-owned dairy industry was destroyed after the break of the Soviet Union. And
as we did here.
So then obviously what happened is that people start to build a small line, and then they brought the Tetra Pak production. They got a very expensive loan from a local bank, and after one step after another, they start to develop. And you know that Wimbledon, which was built like this, and I remember when I used to work at Renaissance Capital, Wimbledon was a very small company with only one factory. And as you probably saw in the headlines, just a few weeks ago, PepsiCo made the decision to buy Wimbledon for $3.5 billion. And Wimbledon has emerged as the biggest dairy and juice producer. And I think these type of success stories can be replicated here in Mongolia.
Yeah, still we have a lot of family-owned companies. That family or the owner himself has run in businesses for many years, and somehow it doesn't happen. It is not going to mature somehow in Mongolia. And to me, people come to be a politician, which is a very disturbing signal for businesses when the businessman goes to be a politician. What do you think about that? Obviously, you know the country. You know many people are doing that.
I guess it's a part of this, maturing the country in terms of both businesses and the political system. I mean, from experience of other countries, it's not unusual for businessmen to go into politics, and obviously it happens here quite often. And but coming back to what you discuss, what are the obstacles for private sector development?
Exactly. And what we can do to improve that?
I think one of the principal issues is access to capital, and if you have access to capital, and then you have introducing corporate governance principles, where you bring a management team in place, you bring outside investors, you introduce the financial reportings, and this is the co-foundation for successful business. And I think this is something that there's a number of businesses here in Mongolia already going through. And so this is a very encouraging sign for me.
And yet we have more and more companies inviting the international rating companies to come, right?
This is part of the
Fitch.
process. Because if you want to bring outside investor, or you want to raise money from borrow a loan from a bank or international bank, they want to know, what is your credibility, your creditworthiness.
From the third point of view, yeah?
From a third party.
Are you familiar with the government plan about Tavan Tolghe? About the call, and they now announcing the tender for operator, etc. How do you see all this process?
Tavan Tolghe, as everyone knows in Mongolia, is a crown jewel asset for Mongolians. So that's why everyone, I think, has a very strong interest in knowing what's happening. And Tavan Tolghe indeed is a unique asset, a big mine. A lot of mining companies around the world, they just would love to be partner of Mongolian government to operate and to own this mine. As you know, there has been changes in the government thinking over the last several years how to best structure the deal to develop this mine. First, it was to sell 49% stake to our partner. Then, in February this year, the government announced that they're going to maintain 100% ownership, and they're going to introduce so-called contract mining. And so, if you look at the experience of other countries that are rich in coal resources, such as Indonesia, this so-called contract mining, it has been successfully introduced. And so therefore...
Basically what ownership is with the government.
Yes.
The other companies come and contractually operating.
Yes.
The mine and sells the product as well?
Yes.
The operating company.
You could do integrated approach where a contractor also responsible for marketing, or you can split into the operational side and then the marketing side. And there are plenty of globally big traders that would love to have off-take agreement.
What is the best scenario for Mongolia?
Well, I think what has been articulated earlier this year, where the government basically attracts this experienced operator. Then this is on the operational side. But when it comes to ownership, I think the recently announced plans to distribute shares in Tavan Tolgoi to population, it's kind of in preferred shares, 10%. I think this is a very good idea, because this will be in one move introduce so-called, in US they call it equity culture. Culture, experience of owning shares. And this is very important, I think, because as you may know, 60% of Americans own shares, either directly or through mutual funds. And the shares represent quite an important part of their wealth, personal wealth. And I think...
and the responsibility.
And also instills yes. the responsibility, obviously. And so if Mongolian government does distribute the shares, I think it would be very important, because then everyone will have...
You said the preferred shares.
Well, preferred shares, which, I mean, there is the distinction between common shares and preferred shares. It's a very technical issue.
Yeah, but common shares, you are really a shareholder, you have a voting right.
Yes.
With preferred shares, you don't have a voting right, but you will be paid first.
Yes, you will.
Then common dividends, right?
Correct.
Shares.
So you have dividends flows that are guaranteed.
Yes.
And
maybe, well, in terms of return, maybe it's better option than a common shares even for people.
Again, this is a technical issues that the government needs to resolve. But I think that in terms of, if you look at this from a point of view, allowing Mongolians directly have ownership in Tavan Tolgoi, I think this is a very crucial policy issue.
Yeah, but with Tavan Tolgoi, we talk about new power stations, we talk about infrastructure, railroad. Altogether, it will demand over $7 billion
yes.
investment.
Correct.
And after this investment's return, I mean, paid completely, then you talk about the issue of giving dividend back to shareholders. It will take a long time, no?
Well, again, it's development of Mongolian natural resources. This is not a 1, 2, 3, 5 year period. We're talking
yes.
about decades.
That's I just wanted you tell that it is not the issue that they got share and next day they got money as well.
I mean, if you look at
equity culture.
It is equity culture.
And knowledge. Yeah.
You need to. I mean, you have to have a situation where Mongolians, they will own the shares, they will benefit from the value increase, because you may not get the dividend next year, but if your share price go up 20, 30, 50%.